Now, speaking of very fast-moving objects, we'll get back to that in a moment, but before then, this recent paper from Ukraine regarding UAP, and you recently authored a paper, actually just a few days ago, that analyzes that and concludes that the best explanation for them are artillery shells, which obviously, given the situation in Ukraine, that wouldn't be unexpected. So how did you determine what these UAP were?
Yeah, so I should first start by saying this paper was posted on the archive in late August 2022, and for a month and a half I resisted the idea of reading it in detail because there were more than a dozen emails that I received asking me to review it, to look at it, to read it, including by the authors. And I just thought it makes no sense because in science, we very often want to reduce as much as possible the noise level so that we can detect the signal. So if you're looking for unidentified objects of extraterrestrial origin, the last place on Earth that you would go to is Ukraine, a military conflict zone where there are lots of things flying in the sky. And why would you choose that region to find something from beyond this Earth? I mean, so to me it sounded like this kind of a statement of finding unidentified objects by astronomers in Ukraine, that doesn't really make sense. And if anyone wants to find such objects, one should go somewhere else. And moreover, I should say I'm not so keen on going to such places where there is a military conflict, because if you were to record data there, it could identify classified objects that either side uses. And then you get into issues of national security, and much of the information about such objects is classified, and you can get into trouble by releasing it openly in the scientific literature. So why would anyone want to publish data on what flies in the sky above Ukraine? That bothered me, and I simply said I'm not interested in looking into it. But then on Monday this week, just a few days ago, I had a special visit by a high-level official from Washington, D.C., who came to my home and basically encouraged me to write a scientific paper about unidentified aerial phenomena and what we could imagine coming to the Earth from an advanced civilization. And I asked him whether he wants it within our understanding of physics, and he said, of course. And okay, so he left at around 7 p.m. and I then wrote down a formula for an object of any given size moving at some speed through the air, through the atmosphere, assuming that the speed is larger than the speed of sound, more than 300 meters per second or so. And for such a supersonic object, if it moves very fast, it would heat up the air around it, because it would create a bow shock, a shock wave, a sonic boom, if you want, in the surrounding air. So I calculated how much power in radiation will be released by that, because we have a lot of data on meteors that I already knew. And then I went to bed at around 9:30 p.m. But just before I fell asleep, I remembered that Ukrainian paper, so I wanted to check it the following morning. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. before my morning jog and looked at the numbers that they mentioned in that paper for the first time, and realized they give me all the numbers. They say there are objects at a distance of about 10 kilometers that are moving up to 15 kilometers per second. I should say that this speed is more than the escape speed from Earth, which is 11 kilometers per second. So they were claiming 15 kilometers per second, and these objects have a size of 10 meters. Okay, very big, just like the size of a jet plane, but moving at a speed that is more than the escape speed from the Earth. at most at a distance of 10 kilometers or so. So I plugged these numbers into the formula that I had from the previous night. And that was just like someone sending me a baseball in a way that allows me to kick it out of the field. It was such an easy thing for me to take these numbers, plug them into my formula, and get how much power is released. And I found that you end up with more than the electric power consumption on Earth for every object. You will end up with a fireball that is more brilliant than all the lights put together on Earth, which sounds crazy because these people claimed, the astronomers who reported about these objects, they claimed that they are dark. They are darker than the sky. So these objects actually block light. They don't produce any light. And that sounded to me like a contradiction. But then I realized my formula actually says that the amount of power released scales with distance to the 5th power. So that means that if you bring the distance down by a factor of 10, you will get a power that is completely reasonable, that you would not see in the daytime. And that means that instead of at 10 kilometers, these objects should be at 1 kilometer distance. And that means that their size, instead of being 10 meters, would be 1 meter. And that means that their speed, instead of being 10 kilometers per second or 15 kilometers per second, would be just 1 to 1.5 kilometers per second. Because they see them moving on the sky in angle. And translating that to a speed means that you need to know the distance. So if the distance is down by a factor of 10, the speed is down by a factor of 10. And then I realized both the speed and the size of the objects is exactly the same as artillery shells. So Ukraine is in military conflict. Artillery shells must be common. That's what they saw. That was a piece of cake to basically conclude that. And I submitted a paper within a couple of hours on this because I had the formula and I had everything written down. And then it was really interesting because to me, it was obvious that they made a mistake by at least a factor of 10. I mean, in principle, it could be more than a factor of 10 in distance. This could be, for example, just bullets shot from a machine gun that is 100 meters from the observatory. I mean, I cannot tell, but definitely not farther than 1 kilometer, because then you would get these fireballs that would be impossible to avoid. So then I thought, okay, well, that's an obvious conclusion. Everyone would agree with me. But what do I see? People saying, oh, he didn't take into account the possibility. I mean, these are UAP advocates on Twitter saying he didn't consider the possibility that these objects could pass through air without interacting with it. And to that I say, well, how were these objects discovered? They were discovered by being dark. That means that they block light. What is light? Light is an electromagnetic entity, an electric field, magnetic field that interacts with objects. So if you block light, the object must have electromagnetic interactions. And therefore, it must interact with the molecules of air, because the molecules of air interact electromagnetically. So you cannot on the one hand claim that an object blocks light and doesn't block molecules of air, because molecules of air interact electromagnetically, and in fact they have a larger cross-section than light has for interacting with matter. So it's easier to interact with molecules of air than it is with the particles of light, photons. And so altogether what that means is, if you see a dark object that blocks light, as these observers claim, it's just a matter of logic to conclude that it must push the molecules of air when it moves through air, because it also blocks light. And as a result, it will create this fireball if it were a 10-kilometer distance. There is no way out of that. You cannot invent an object that will block light and not block molecules of air. There is no way. So then I hear from a reporter from Vice, Matthew Gold, and he sends me an email from the observers, from the astronomers, the lead astronomer of the team, Boris Zilayev, says, Avi Loeb is a theorist. We are experimentalists. We just report what we see. To which I say, well, both experimentalists and theorists are obligated to use logic. You can't avoid thinking. You cannot just say, I'm an observer, I don't want to think about what I see. Because if you claim something, if you claim a certain distance, you need to check whether your method of inferring the distance might be wrong. And if the implications of having that distance are incompatible with what you see, then you made a mistake. And the method they use to infer the distance is really very faulty. It's not as if they had a lot of sites where they triangulated and found these dark objects from multiple directions so they could pinpoint the distance very accurately. They didn't have that data. So, my point is, you have to use your head, you have to think about it and realize that you can't have a distance of 10 kilometers with those velocities because you would see a fireball. And therefore the distance needs to be smaller. And then I get an email from Mick West, who is the official UAP debunker. Okay, so he made a name for himself. He's not a scientist, but made a name for himself for debunking unidentified aerial phenomena over the years. And he also has a problem with my interpretation. So I'm getting attacked from all directions. You know, when you see people shooting at you from opposite directions, you think to yourself, maybe I should duck down, and then the bullets would reach the other side. In my case, I had a bulletproof shield of science. So I don't care if they shoot at me because I have science to protect me. So Mick West, what is his problem? His problem is, if you look at one of the figures, the images that were released by the Ukrainian astronomers, they had several snapshots of a single object separated by 0.02 seconds. So you have 3 images of the dark object separated by the same amount of time. But what you find is that the distance projected on the sky between the third snapshot and the second snapshot is bigger than the distance projected on the sky between the second snapshot and the other one under it. So the claim is, by Mick West, the object must be accelerating because it moves at a different speed at different times. And only an insect can do that. An artillery shell will not do that because it moves at a constant speed while you're taking these frames. So you would see always the same length across the sky traveled by this object. And so I said to Mick, have you never seen a train in your life? When the train is far away, it moves very little across your field of view. But when it comes close to you, it just zooms by you. How is that possible if the train is moving at a constant speed? How is it possible that projected on your field of view, it moves very slowly far away and it moves very fast close to you? Did you ever think about it? The answer is that the angle across which it moves over a fixed period of time is inversely proportional to the distance. And so the angle is small at large distances and it's big at small distances. So when looking at an artillery shell that is either approaching Kiev or going away from Kiev, you will see that at close distances it moves a lot, and at large distances it moves little, even if it moves actually at a constant speed. Unless it doesn't aim at Kiev or doesn't aim away from Kiev, in which case it's a very special coincidence that it moves exactly perpendicular to your line of sight. So you can actually, by assuming that it moves at a constant speed, figure out the angle at which it moves. Anyway, so I received all these ricochets, or you might call it hostile fire from all directions. And, I don't really care how many likes I have on Twitter. That's completely irrelevant. And then within a couple of days, I read a report in a Hungarian magazine quoting a statement made by the Kiev Observatory, which is handled by the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. And they say, we believe that the distance measurements are not reliable, that in fact, what was reported in this paper is not to be trusted in terms of distance. So they basically sided with me. And they say we have no responsibility for what these authors, these astronomers wrote. So what's the bottom line? What's the lesson from this? First of all, it was a revelation to me, because here is a situation where I just follow, simple rational thinking, and I'm being attacked from all directions. Now, should I really pay attention to what these people are saying? If some people want to believe, they don't want to think. Other people just say, we just observe these things. We don't know what they mean. These are scientists, the astronomers that reported about it. And other people just don't understand what's going on. And you get caught in the middle of that, where my interpretation is so simple and makes so much sense, in a war zone, to either have bullets from a machine gun or artillery shells flying around, and that's what these dark objects are, rather than talking about an object the size of an airplane moving at escape speed from the Earth at a distance of 10 kilometers that would unavoidably produce a fireball. So, that was interesting. It's a teaching moment for me, to basically, sort of like a litmus test, to see who is reasonable.
Now, it seems to me that it would be an easy question to solve, in the sense that all you have to do is repeat the observation somewhere else that's not in a war zone, and if you don't see anything, then there it is, right?
Exactly. But one thing that people have to keep in mind, which is often being suggested, is you can't have a situation that is logically inconsistent. You can't, on the one hand, claim that you see an object because it blocks light, but it doesn't block air molecules. That is not possible, okay? If the object passes through the air without disturbing it, it will not block light, okay? Even if you imagine taking a tennis net, a net with big holes in it, moving it through air, it will still carry some air with it, and it will not be opaque, and the claim is these objects are opaque. So if you imagine an opaque object moving through air, it will definitely push the air. And if you move it at the escape speed from the Earth, it will generate a fireball. Okay? So there is no way around that. And you can't avoid logical thinking by saying, I believe, or saying, someone else said that. If someone else said that, it doesn't make it true. And a lot of people think, under oath, if people testify under oath in front of Congress, that is sufficient data to establish the scientific credibility of the claim that they make. Well, I should remind people that a lot of prisoners are put in jail because of statement made by some people under oath, and then a DNA test finds them innocent. Okay, there are many examples of that. Even people that were put on death row. Humans are not scientific detectors. When we don't have anything better, we use it in the legal system. But you can't write a scientific paper based on what humans tell you, okay? It's not a matter of a personal experience. We need instruments that collect quantitative data and can repeat the measurement under similar circumstances. That's the foundation of science. And when you have instruments recording data, you do not need to require that they are put under oath. These instruments just record whatever they record. You don't need to ask them. questions.